I know my sheep know me. Jesus describes the relationship between the shepherd and the sheep. The sheep know the shepherd because the shepherd lives among them. That's why the shepherds were somewhat outcast in Jesus' time, because they lived in the fields, they lived in the pastures, they lived with the sheep. They had to, so that the sheep would recognize them, would see them as one of their own, and really the head of their flock. The shepherd got to know his sheep, got to know which ones were his, whose they were, and the sheep then got familiar with his voice and his scent and his being, and they were comfortable being in his presence. The shepherd then could look above them and see where the good grazing ground was, and where the watering holes were, and where the danger lay. And the shepherd could move them in the directions that they needed to be moved, and they had no idea what was going on. But they trusted the shepherd. They recognized his voice. And Jesus uses this image today to demonstrate the relationship that we have with God, the relationship really that we have with our faith. Because Jesus came down to live among us. Just like the shepherd lived among the sheep, Jesus lived among us so that we would see him and hear him and touch him and be able to recognize him. And Jesus specifically called his apostles to him from their homes. You have to leave everything you have because I need you to live with me. He needed his apostles to live with him for 3 years because Jesus did not pass on the faith in a book. He never wrote a book. He didn't write a dissertation. He didn't leave a set of instructions. He left none of that. Nothing in written form. What he needed was he needed these apostles who lived with him day in and day out. They learned his rhythm. They saw his relationship with the Father. They began to understand how he lived and how they were called to live in the world. By living with Jesus, they got to know what it meant to be a Christian, to be a follower of Christ. That's why Jesus gathered them to himself. And then they went out and they gathered disciples around themselves and taught those disciples how to live the Christian faith, and so on and so forth. Because you think about the first 70 years of Christianity, the New Testament has not yet been compiled. The New Testament isn't completed until 70 years after Jesus ascends into heaven. And then as a ready form that everyone has access to, that doesn't come for some time yet. Christians didn't have the scriptures to rely on in the same way that we have today. But that isn't to say they weren't without instruction. Because God's plan was not to pass on a book that had all the answers. God's plan was to pass on a lifestyle. We call this sacred tradition. That sacred tradition, learning how to live the faith before we begin studying it, before we begin doing anything else, living the faith is what passes it on. And that's what we're called to do even today. We're called to live that faith, especially in our homes and as families, so that the faith gets passed on, that it gets learned. Because ultimately, nobody learns from a book. Nobody learns from a book. We learn from experience. We learn from example. We learn from hearing and seeing and touching and doing. My favorite example that I always use about this is learning how to drive. You don't learn how to drive because you pick up the manual and you read it. And having completed that, say, okay, now I know how to drive. Give me the wheel. No. You learn how to drive because you've been a passenger for at least 15 years. You sat in that vehicle for 15 years and you got the feel of it. And you got to know what it was like and how it worked and what it should be like. And then, maybe when you turn 16, you get to, or 15, you get to move over to the driver's seat. But you have an experienced driver next to you who's able to cue you, who's able to remind you what to look out for, who's able to point things out and help you on that journey. And even after you get your license, you really don't know how to drive until you do it lots and lots. You have to drive through rain and snow and on ice and in fog and day and night and when the deer runs out in front of you. You don't learn how to drive until you do it. You don't learn how to be a Christian until you do it. We learn our faith by living it. And that's how the faith then is passed on. That's why Christ came among us as the Good Shepherd, so that we would begin to recognize what this was like and how we were supposed to do it. And he called then his apostles and his disciples to do that as well, to live the faith first and foremost. And then you can begin studying it, and you can begin diving more deeply into it by means of the scriptures, or by means of your prayer life, or so on and so forth. But ultimately, it is by doing it. I think about the relationship there between that shepherd and those sheep. And it's interesting that Jesus uses that analogy, because anybody who has a pet knows that you know that animal really well, and that animal really gets to know you. And I even look at it in my own life with my dog. I see what Jesus is talking about. Because when I leave the house, my dog, wherever he is in the house, he knows I'm going because I'm saying, all right, you be good. And then I walk out the door. Whatever door I went out of is the door I will find him sitting by when I come home, no matter how long I have been away. He will be sitting by the back door if I went out that door, the garage door if I went out that door, the front door, wherever I went, that's where he sits. He watched me. He knows. And he looks for me to return through that door. That's what a Christian is supposed to do. Jesus has ascended to heaven. Jesus has left. The Christian is supposed to now look in the direction of his return, expecting him to come back, as he said, to keep our eyes fixed on eternity, to see when he will be returning, just like that dog that sits by the door. And my dog must think I'm God, because as soon as I walk into the dark house, all of a sudden the lights come on, and there is light. So he must think that I have something to do with that. And again, isn't that how a Christian is supposed to approach God? That I know, Lord, my life is dark until you are in it. And when you are in my life, through the scriptures, through the tradition of the church, through the teaching of Holy Mother Church, I see more clearly how I am supposed to live in this life. That there really is a light. And that dog relies on me for his food and his water and his medical care or whatever. He has no idea what I do. He has no idea how much I see and how much I take care of him. We have no idea how active God is in our lives and how much he overlooks us. But that relationship that Jesus describes, the relationship between the animal and the person, the shepherd, the owner, is so tight. We can see that reflected in our own life today. But God does us one better. He doesn't just leave us creatures and master. He actually adopts us as his children. He takes us to be his own kids so that we have a place in his house. He lifts us up and elevates us and calls us now to something more. And then we teach each other how to be that something more. And that's really what St. Paul talks about today when he describes to the Romans what it's like to live in this Christian family. And he describes it as basically, whatever you're going to do, don't do it halfway. Do it. Dive in and do it. If you are a teacher, then be a good teacher. If you are contributing, then contribute. If you are getting someone all fired up, then fire them up. Don't do anything halfway, because your participation in the body is so important. Each and every one of us, because we've been raised up, are children of God. We're other Christ, which means in our baptism, we've been made priest, prophet, and king. We also share in the relationship of being a shepherd. each in our own way. Pope Francis, the Archbishop, me, we're not the only shepherds. Every one of us is called to be a shepherd in some way. Every one of us is supposed to show others how to live the Christian life. And if we demonstrate that by our lives, by keeping our eyes fixed on God, by living the way He taught, by living in this tradition, then we're going to teach others how to live the Christian faith. We're not going to teach them by inviting them to a study group. That's not where it starts. It starts in the home. It starts with the way we live our own Christian life. That's how we teach. So if you're a mom, or a dad, or a grandparent, or even with your coworkers at work, or a group that gets together, your example teaches others how to live the Christian life, and it invites people into that. For goodness sakes, I have learned so much about how to have a relationship with God by watching my dog. And he doesn't have a thought going through his head, and I learn from him. How much more will someone be able to learn about a relationship with God by watching you? If they watch you and see how to worship God, how to love God, how to live the faith, then you have been a shepherd. You have helped bring the flock together. Because those who really are God's flock will recognize His voice, whether it comes from me or whether it comes from you. Living the faith before all else is what casts